Okay, good morning. Today we'll just deal with the concept called prose because the textbook that has been prescribed for you for this particular semester is titled Harmony of Prose. So it would be better if you have an idea of what prose is all about. So we have heard about different genres of literature like prose, poetry, drama, etc. Now, what exactly is prose? So, when you look at writing, prose would mean any kind of written work that follows a basic grammatical structure. That means, you will understand that prose is actually words, phrases arranged into sentences and paragraphs. There is a structure to it. And this actually stands out from poetry because when we look at poetry, what is it that first comes to our mind? We think about stanzas, we think about lines, right? So there is a metrical structure to poetry. Whereas prose is simply language that follows the natural patterns that's found in everyday speech, right? So prose can be defined as verbal or written language, which follows the natural flow of speech. So we understand when we read through works, we understand that prose is the most common form of writing, which is used both in fiction as well as non-fictional works. And this word prose, it comes from the Latin word prosa oratio, which actually means straightforward. So that means there is a kind of structure to it, and there's no metrical structure, but there's a grammatical structure to it. That means there is this language following the natural patterns. That is why it has come from the Latin word prosa oratia, meaning straightforward. So commonly there are four types of prose. So, you can understand that prose can vary depending on the different kinds of styles and purposes. And based on that, we can divide prose into four distinct type of prose that the writers usually use. The first one would be non-fictional prose. So non-fictional prose is a true story, or you can even say a factual account of events or information, and it is non-fiction, right? So you have like things like newspaper articles, instruction manuals, textbooks, they all fall into this category, right? And if you have read Annie Frank's Diary of a Young Girl, it is actually a compilation of journal excerpts, right? And it tells you the story of this young teenager who had this very bad experience of hiding with her family in the Nazi-occupied Netherlands during the World War II. So if you've read that, right? If Annie Frank's diary, if you have read, you'll understand that. So it is, you have non-fictional prose. So it is a factual account of events and information, right? Then you have fictional prose. Fictional prose would be a literary work of fiction. So this is the most popular type of literary prose because we see this in novels, in short stories, and fictional prose would generally have characters. There would be a plot to it. There would be setting to it. There would be a dialogue. And this is very popular because everybody enjoys reading short stories and novels. It's a world of imagination, a world which has been created by the writer. So we have non-fictional prose, fictional prose, and you have something called heroic prose. So heroic prose would be a literary work which has come down to us through oral tradition. It could be written down, but it was meant to be recited, right? So it would basically be a legend or a fable. We have a lot of Irish tales. We have the Old English writing, Beowulf. So this is all heroic prose because it has come down to us. It can be written, but it has come down to us through the oral tradition. It has been preserved through the oral tradition or the word of mouth. So that means it was mainly written to be recited. And the fourth kind of prose is prose poetry. Now, prose poetry is actually poetry that is written in the prose form. So it is a kind of, you can say, a literary hybrid which has rhythmic as well as rhyming patterns, right? If you read the poems of Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire, the French poet, we have a lot of his works, we can say prose poems. And there is a poem titled Be Drunk. And it starts off like this. And if sometimes in the steps of a palace or the green grass of a ditch, in the mournful solitude of your room, see, it is poetry, but at the same time, there is a grammatical structure to it. So it is titled as prose poetry, right? So we talk about fictional prose, non-fictional prose, heroic prose, and also prose poetry. Now, what is the function of prose writing? Why do we have prose? What's the function of prose? Uh, if you look at George Orwell, who has written Animal Farm, uh, he is a person who has written his novels in very plain language, right? So he always says, do not use long words. So you can use short words or short sentences and keep your writing quite plain and simple and lucid. So what is the function of prose in writing? Prose can, we can say, fulfill a story's promise. So when you look at literature, we understand that the basic purpose of prose is to convey what? It is to give you an idea, it is to deliver information, it is maybe to tell a story. So prose is the kind of writing which a writer uses to fulfill his or her basic promise to a reader to deliver a story with characters, setting, conflict, a plot, and a final payoff, right? So that is a basic purpose. So, the writer, if you are writing prose, what are you doing? To the reader, you are giving him or her what he wants, what you have promised to deliver. So there'll be characters, there'll be setting, there would be conflict, there would be plot. Sometimes it would be non-fiction, right? So it is fulfilling your promise as a writer. Secondly, it is like, you can say creating a voice, because as a writer, you and me, if we are writers, each of us, we've got our own way of using language. We call it the writer's voice. Now, suppose I give each of you, I think there are 24 of you in the class. If I give a topic like rain, maybe a topic rain, write something on rain. I am sure that 25 of you will write differently. Each of us, we've got our own voice. So we could say that prose can be used to create a voice. So we have our own writer's voice, the way of using our language. So using prose in different ways would help writers, bring out their voice, or, expose this voice to others. So as I told you, if I give you a topic titled rain, I am sure all of you will bring out different forms. It can be, some of you might bring out non-fictional prose, some of you might bring out fictional prose, some of you might bring out prose poetry. Okay, so it is using prose in different ways would help a writer or help the writer in you to bring out what is in your mind, to show off your voice to the world. Right? So when we read the novels of Charles Dickens, we understand, even when we read Oliver Twist, or when we read David Copperfield or Nicholas Nickleby or The Tale of Two Cities, we understand that there were so many thoughts and hopes that were going through his mind. Right? And every time he wrote a novel or the prose that he wrote, whatever it was, it was actually different hues of his life. He was trying to expose that. Take for example, any writer. If you take Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Far from the Madding Crowd, all these are quite Mayor of Casterbridge. All these are different writings, and it is actually the thoughts, I can say the thoughts and the emotions, the feelings, the hopes, the desires that were going through the mind of the writer. So whenever he wrote a particular novel, you can understand the ambience. He tried to depict the ambience, the kind of feeling that he was going through in a particular ambience, right? And another aspect, or you can say another function of prose is to build a rapport through familiarity. So when we look at prose, we always realize that prose is quite often used in a conversational tone. And it is this conversational tone that helps you to connect to a story and to its characters. When you read a book, when you read Pride and Prejudice, or if you read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, if you read that, what do you understand? you understand that you become one with the character, or you are able to connect to the story, you're able to connect to the characters. And that is why, for certain people, they get so engrossed in the stories that they are not able to put the book down, right? So it is so very interesting. That means you are able to build a rapport through the familiarity that you develop while reading. So that is what prose does. It's got this conversational tone which helps you to connect to a story, right? When you read Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, you are able to identify with the characters. You're able to identify with Sidney Carton. You're able to identify with Lucy Manet. You're able to identify with Alexander Manet, right? And you know that there is, you feel that you're one with them, and you want to see what's going to happen, right? So that is the aspect of building rapport through familiarity, right? So these are some of the functions of prose in writing: fulfilling a story's promise. It can create a voice for the writer. It can build a rapport for the reader through familiarity. Okay. So we talked about prose. So what is the difference between prose and poetry? Now that is the main thing. Prose is different from poetry. Both these genres, prose and poetry, have got unique qualities. But these unique qualities distinguish one from another. When you look at prose, we understand that, as I have explained now, prose is something that follows the natural patterns of speech and communication, right? So it has a grammatical structure, it's got sentences, it has paragraphs, it uses the everyday normal language that we use, right? It's very common, it's very, I would say, very clear and lucid. And the sentences and thoughts would continue across the lines. There are no breaks. Whereas when you look at poetry, especially when you look at traditional poetry, we understand that there are deliberate patterns like rhythm, rhyme, etc., which is not seen in prose. And some poems also have this metrical structure. We talk about the iambic pentameter, right? We talk about the dactylic meter. So these are repeating patterns of beat, right? We talk about the iamb, right? The dactyl. So there is a metrical structure to most poems, not all, but most poems, especially traditional poems. And we also understand that poetry would bring in more of figurative language. We have, figures of speech. We can say personification, metonymy, metaphors, commonly, similes, transferred epithet. All these are figurative language which is used in poetry, not much in prose. And poems, when you look at the poems only, you understand that they would stand out. The way it is written, it's not like the way prose is written. It would kind of stand out on the page that you look at, because there are so many varying line lengths, and you find that there is, when you look at a prose page and a poetry page, you understand that on a poetry page there is more of space, right? More of white space left, or whatever color paper you're using. There's more of space left. Whereas in prose, there is not much of space, because in prose, what you understand is the sentence and the thoughts would continue across the line. So there are no deliberate line breaks. Whereas in poetry, we have deliberate line breaks, and they stand out because there are varying line lengths. There is also, sometimes when you look at poems, you see the the rhyming pattern that stands out, right? So when you look at, I think when you learn Shakespeare's sonnet, you must have learned about Italian sonnet, the Shakespearean sonnet, the 14 line, right? The octave, the sestet, the volta in between. See, all these are there for poetry. Right, and you also learned about the rhyme scheme, right, of Shakespearean sonnet, and also the Petrarchan or the Italian sonnet in the first semester. I think you had to learn a sonnet by Shakespeare, right? So I think, yeah, in that you might have learned about Shakespearean sonnet. You might have learned about the octave, the sestet, the figure, the change of the thought, right? The something called the volta. All that is there in poetry, which is clearly distinguished from prose. So, to conclude, we would say that prose is a literary device. it refers to writing that is structured in a very grammatical way with words and phrases that build sentences and paragraphs. So, works which are usually written in prose would feature language that would flow in natural patterns of everyday speech. It's a kind of conversational speech. And you can also understand that prose is the most common and the most popular form of writing in fiction and also in non-fiction works, because that's what people usually love. I am sure most of the people would love reading prose rather than poetry. There are certain people who love reading poetry, but majority of people enjoy reading prose. So as a literary device, we would say that prose is a way for writers to communicate with readers in a straightforward, in a very conversational manner and tone. So this creates a level of familiarity. So that allows the reader to connect with the writer's expression, to connect with the narrative, to connect with the characters and all that, right? So when you look at prose, so certain novels or certain prose writings have very significant lines that would grab the attention of the reader, right? And this line, the first line, would set the tone, it would set the style of work, it would establish the elements of setting, it would tell you something about the characters, the plot, right? And sometimes, the first prose line of a novel can be very, very memorable. It can inspire you to read. When I was reading, there was one when I was doing my PG, I just came across this line, "Call me Ishmael." And that actually inspired me to read Moby Dick, Herman Melville's Moby Dick. It starts with "Call me Ishmael." So, I was quite curious to know what it was. And A Tale of Two Cities, that novel by Charles Dickens, it's a very common first line that we see. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. If you've read that novel, if you've not read this, you should read this novel also, right? A Tale of Two Cities, Pride and Prejudice. These are some of the very interesting classics which you should not miss. Then you have Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I think 3 years back, we had this for second year students had been prescribed The Great Gatsby. I taught them Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, right? Then you have The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. These are few examples of prose. Then you have Annie Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl, right? Animal Farm. In Animal Farm, there's a very catchy line, which caught my interest. It's like in George Orwell's Animal Farm. He says, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Yes, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Then you have Gabriel Garcia Marquez' 100 Years of Solitude. Very interesting book. Then you have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Anyway, for your 6th semester, you have been prescribed that textbook. That novel, The Color Purple, so you can read that then. So it's kind of very interesting when you look at the different kind of prose writings, right? And like the types of prose, you can have non-fiction. Non-fiction would be manuals, newspaper articles, textbooks. Heroic prose, the kind of legend or fable that was meant to be recited, which has come down to us through oral tradition, right? Fiction, the fiction is like, the most familiar kind of prose, novels, short stories, and you will have plot, setting, characters, everything in that. And the prose poetry. So it's poetry which is written in the form of a prose. So it would be a hybrid. There would be some rhyme, rhythm in between. So we need to understand that prose is an essential literary device in literature. And we would say that, can say that it is basically the foundation for storytelling. So the prose in literary works functions in such a way to convey ideas, to present information, create a narrative for the reader. There would be this intricate combinations of plot, conflict, characters, setting, resolutions. So I would advise you and I would encourage you to read as many prose works or novels or non-fiction as you can. A few of the books which I would recommend for you right now would be Moby Dick. Moby Dick is very interesting. You can read Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, then George Orwell's 1984. Then you can also read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. It's very interesting. Then you have another one, Alice Walker's Color Purple. Maybe you can just wait because you have that prescribed for your sixth semester. Maybe you can read something by Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eyes. All these are very interesting. So please take your time to read these works and get yourself acquainted with Annie Frank's diary. You should read that, Annie Frank's diary. It's very, very interesting. You should get yourself acquainted with all this because as students of literature, it's very important that you know what prose is, you know what are the different kinds of prose, and you should also have a basic idea of the different kind of prose writing. So you need to definitely go through them and read them. So do not waste your time now. You've got plenty of time, so you can just there are so many books available online in e-format. E-books are available, so you can just go through that and read them. So with that, I would just like to conclude my topic on this concept called prose. So I hope you have understood. If you have any questions, you can ask me now.